You know, we think of universities as these incredible gateways to opportunity. But what if the very architecture of those places was actually designed to keep people out? Today, we're going to dig into a really critical look at Indian universities to uncover the hidden structures that can shape a student's entire future, sometimes before they even set foot on campus.
This quote, it just nails it. It sets up the Indian university not just as a place to learn, but as a kind of battleground. It's the space where a massive contradiction plays out, the promise of a modern, equal future clashing head-on with the weight of some very ancient social rules.
So what is this paradox, really? Well, it's the puzzle at the very heart of what we're talking about today. How can an institution that's supposed to be built on equality actually end up reinforcing some of the oldest divisions in society? We're going to unpack this by looking at the ideas, the numbers, and the very real human cost. Okay, so first up, let's tackle this core idea, the casteless campus paradox. We're going to explore that massive gap between the dream of a society based purely on merit and the tough reality that so many people face every day. See, on the surface, these top universities are held up as these shiny examples of a modern India. But the research we're looking at tells a totally different story. It suggests that behind that shiny facade, the old social pyramid is still very much intact, just wearing the disguise of modern academic life. So you have to ask, how was this whole architecture of exclusion even built in the first place? Well, the first and maybe the most crucial building block is its ideological foundation. And that foundation is a single powerful word, merit. It sounds so fair, so objective, right? But we're about to see how it can be used as a tool for exclusion. And that brings us to this really key concept, the privilege of castelessness. Now, what does that mean? It's basically the ability of the dominant group to say, me, I don't have a caste. I'm just here because I'm smart and I worked hard. By doing that, they frame themselves as a neutral standard, which automatically marks students from marginalized communities as the only ones who do have a caste identity. This slide just captures that disconnect perfectly. The ideal we're sold is that merit is a fair race and the best person wins. But the reality? The racetrack isn't level. Some people start the race with generations of social and cultural capital, things like fluency in English or access to expensive coaching, while others are trying to run the same race with hurdles put in their way from the very beginning. All right, so we've talked about the ideas. Now let's move on to the hard data, because the numbers, well, they really show us the structural beams holding this architecture up. They prove that this isn't just about a few individual biases. It's actually built right into the system. So take a look at this data on faculty hiring in some of India's top universities. What you're looking at is a pretty shocking lack of representation from what are known as scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and other backward class communities, or SC, ST, and OBC. You see it especially at the senior professor levels. And think about it, when you don't have role models or mentors who look like you, that's a huge barrier in itself. Let's just pull one number from that table for a second to really let it sink in. At IIT Kharagpur, one of the most prestigious engineering schools, out of 101 new professors hired in 1 year, only 2 were from SC and ST communities combined. 2. That's not a fluke. It's a pattern, and it's often explained away with vague criteria like suitability in job interviews. Okay, so now let's look at the other end of the journey, the students. This table shows who's dropping out. Now, the official line might be personal reasons, but the data clearly shows that a way higher number of students from marginalized communities are forced to leave these elite schools before they can even finish. It's a phenomenon people call the leaky pipeline. 13,626. Just think about that number. That's how many students from SC, ST, and OBC communities dropped out of top-tier central universities, IITs, and IIMs in just 5 years. That's a staggering loss of talent, and it points to a massive systemic failure. The numbers tell a powerful story about what is happening, but they don't tell us how it feels. So for this next part, let's shift our focus to the day-to-day reality of this. What does this architecture of exclusion actually feel like for a student on the inside? Well, exclusion shows up in a lot of different ways. The source material talks about how students report being deliberately grouped together in hostels, which basically creates these Dalit ghettos on campus. They get shut out of informal study groups or dining clubs, which are, super important for networking. And many talk about the painful experience of friends suddenly pulling away the moment their caste becomes known. This quote, wow, it reveals just how sneaky this kind of exclusion can be. On campuses that use ranked entrance exams, a question that sounds completely innocent, like, hey, what was your rank, is actually a coded way of asking for someone's caste. Because of affirmative action policies, your rank can signal which admission category you came through, and that information is then used to mark and isolate you.
When you add all this up, the social isolation, the academic pressure, the constant hostility, it takes an absolutely brutal psychological toll. It's gotten so bad that activists and scholars have started using this very powerful term, institutional murder. The argument here is that these tragic student suicides aren't just individual acts of despair. They're the predictable, tragic result of institutions completely failing to protect their most vulnerable students. And the case of Rohit Vemula, a PhD student at the University of Hyderabad, is what really brought this issue to the entire nation's attention. His suicide note was just heartbreaking. It laid bare the human cost of the system when he wrote that his value as a human being had been reduced down to just one thing: his caste. But it's really important to know that this grim picture is also a site of incredible, fierce resistance. So for the final part of our explainer, we're going to focus on the student-led movements that are pushing back, that are demanding change, and that are trying to forge a new path forward.
And this fight back is happening on so many fronts. First, you have student groups using legal tools like right-to-information requests to become data activists. They're the ones digging up the very numbers we just looked at. Second, they're building their own support networks, creating mentorship groups to provide the guidance that the university isn't. And finally, they're taking the fight to the legal system, pushing for a specific law, a Rohit Act, to hold these institutions accountable.
But this source argues that just filling a few job vacancies isn't going to cut it. It calls for nothing less than a cultural revolution on campus. What does that look like? It means we need to completely redefine what merit means so that it includes things like resilience. It means demanding justice in the curriculum itself so that knowledge from Dalit and other marginalized communities is included. It means real accountability through laws, and so importantly, creating mental health support that actually understands the specific trauma of caste discrimination.
So we end up right back where we started, with a big question. After looking at the ideology, the numbers, and the deep human cost, you're left wondering, what does it really take to tear down an architecture that's so deeply embedded in our institutions? The struggle that's happening on these campuses tells us it's going to take a lot more than a few new policies. It's going to require a fundamental shift in culture, in power, and in what we even consider to be valuable knowledge in the first place.